joining our webinar on augmented reality. Is AR really a silver bullet for retail, hospitality and the leisure sectors is the question that we pose. I am Simon Barker, head of the IP and media team at Freeths. What we want to do is help businesses get the best value out of their IP and media assets. So we are excited to be presenting this webinar to you today. I am joined by a panel of experts this morning. From Freeths, we've got Darren Williamson, who is our National Head of Real Estate, and Luke Dixon, a partner in our data protection and e-privacy team. Also from Insider Trends, we've got Jack Stratton. Jack is a senior trends consultant. Insider Trends is a leading end-to-end retail futures consultancy working for some of the world's leading brands. From Darabase, we have co-founder David Bonfi. Darabase is the AR media company for brands and advertisers wanting to run immersive AR media layered over the real world outdoors. So we're going to soon be starting the panel discussion, but before we do, I wanted to confirm that there is going to be an opportunity to ask questions during the talk. We'd like to make the sessions interactive as possible, and so please do feel free to ask questions. You can submit the questions via the questions and answers function on Zoom. If we don't manage to get around to answering everybody's questions, we will be following up in the next few days, so no worries there. We're also going to be running some live polls throughout this session, and the results of those will be available in real time. So please do help out by participating in those polls. I think that would be really interesting to see what the results are. So, augmented reality, why am I interested as a lawyer? Well, aside from the fact that it's a really interesting creative media, there is no specific regulation around its use currently. And that presents some challenges as well as some opportunities, but also some really interesting legal questions. And obviously we want to help our clients navigate those questions successfully as AR gets bigger and bigger. And that's what we expect. I guess that brings us to our first poll of today's session, because we're keen to hear from you just how big you think AR actually is. So if Rebecca's got a poll question, we're asking how many people do you think are using augmented reality every month globally on mobiles? 10 million, 100 million, 500 million, or 1 billion or more? Please vote now. Suspense. Oh, okay, so 100 million. I think we may have a job on our hands, guys. I'm going to let Jack comment on that result, I think. So I think without further ado, pleased to kick off today's panel. And over to you, Jack, Insider Trends.
Thank you very much, Simon. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, the first thing I can do is reveal the answer to that. Is actually 1 billion or more. So we were kind of hoping that you would underestimate this, because that kind of puts us in the perfect position. But yeah, I'm not entirely surprised either, because I think even I was quite surprised when I saw that figure, and I think it gives us an indication of just how quickly augmented reality is growing among consumers around the world. That's something David will be talking about in a lot more detail, but yeah, it's really interesting, because I think possibly I would have instinctively put something like 100 million or 500 million myself. More than a billion is incredible, and kind of puts into perspective, you know, where things are. I'm going to briefly now share a deck with you guys. I'm going to speak for about 5-10 minutes just to do a bit of scene setting. Really, I'm going to touch on some examples of augmented reality that have kind of really taken hold during the pandemic. But more importantly, I just want to kind of set the scene in terms of some broad trends during the pandemic itself. So what I wanted to do, first and foremost, is just talk about what's happened during the pandemic in terms of consumer behaviors. None of this will be new to anyone, I don't think, on this call, but I think it's just important to put in perspective just how much things have changed, and to an extent how that might continue beyond the pandemic. So 40% of US consumers have tried a new shopping behavior. I've taken US stats here, but we're seeing similar stats in the UK and across Europe. 73% of them intend to keep shopping in these new ways. There are so many surveys at the moment trying to get hold of this big question that we all have, which is how much, or to what extent really, have our shopping habits changed permanently? How many people will be desperate to get back into stores? And there's lots of different ways of looking at that. And of course, we won't know until it happens. But I think some of these new shopping habits, we can say for sure, are changing. And to be clear, when I'm talking about new shopping behaviors, that isn't just shopping online. That's also the way we're shopping changing. So that particular survey explores lots of different habits that have changed, which indeed could include using augmented reality to buy something, using new technology in some way. And in Britain, 53% of Brits say they will shop more online post-pandemic. And to be clear, it's not just buying that's changed. I think it's really worth emphasizing that more of us are just spending more time online. 37% are working less and spending more time online, and 35% are browsing online shops for inspiration at least once a week. So we're all buying stuff more online, and that may well continue beyond the pandemic, and we're spending more time online. Importantly, though, something I think that gets overlooked slightly, and I've just taken the figure that was early in the pandemic when actually all stores were closed in the UK in the first lockdown, which is probably the most draconian. So e-commerce sales are massively increasing in April 2020. The increase for online-only brands was actually only 8% in that period, whereas for multi-channel brands, so that means brands that had stores as well, the increase was 36%. I use this a lot because I think it's a really good way of reminding ourselves that actually the value of being a truly omni-channel or multi-channel retailer has really been proven in the pandemic. Actually, although of course a lot of brands in the UK and globally are closing stores and are really, really suffering, actually also the most successful retailers have often been the ones with a massive store footprint. I could give you countless examples, but I often mention Target in the US because they were quick to adapt how their stores were being used for click and collect, and for lots of different kind of digital adaptations to provide convenience when their stores were either completely closed down or partially open. They've been incredibly successful, actually, and they've really used their stores to complement all those new online customers. So it's important to remember this, actually. This has been a successful period for multi-channel brands too. So we're all online more. I actually did a project for Converse, and I just wanted to mention this because it's been another really interesting trend in the pandemic. And Converse got me to look at the kind of the online shoe market in general. And in that, I did loads of assessments of different websites. And the biggest thing that struck me about it when I was looking at all these different websites, as you can hopefully see now from these slides in the background, is how unbelievably dull the majority of these websites are. They're so efficient, they're so convenient. They're actually pretty good to shop on in many respects. But the inspiration is utterly lacking. They're all kind of so completely optimized. They're sort of algorithmic perfection. You get everything super quickly. But what's starting to happen is that convenience is kind of being focused on so much that sometimes online the inspiration is lacking. That is making people actually excited about getting back into stores. That's one effect. But the other effect is that e-commerce and technology has kind of evolved, and consumers have become more open to using technology in interesting ways just to provide some inspiration and some engagement and some fun. McKinsey did a survey during this pandemic, and they came up with this lovely term called the grocery rut. They said a lot of online shoppers are in what they call a grocery rut, which is basically that everything's perfect when they shop online. They get everything they need. But after a few months, they were finding they were really, really bored. They were getting all the same items all the time. There's no inspiration. It was functional, but not fun. So e-commerce has kind of evolved. And I think shopping in general, the retail industry has been finding ways of adapting and getting consumers on board with new ways to shop online to make online shopping more fun. Now, this kind of technology that you're looking at now was around long before the pandemic. But the difference during the pandemic has been take up. So this is just one example where Mac have started to tie up with influencers in YouTube, and you can do virtual try-ons whilst you're watching a particular video. So this is very simple augmented reality that we're seeing all kinds of brands optimize, whether you're trying on sunglasses at home or clothes or whatever. Augmented reality is kind of adding this layer that suddenly is making, it's kind of providing a real useful way of making that purchase easier or that experience easier. So I suppose a big thing that pandemic has done is maybe changed the perception around augmented reality and made people realize just how useful and usable this technology is. And that idea, I think, of maybe it being slightly more futuristic or slightly more gimmicky has disappeared pretty quickly. We're now seeing this hit the mass market in this way. So millions of people in the UK alone have used virtual try-on during the pandemic, which is remarkable. And that's very much something that we think is here to stay. And this is happening in all kinds of different ways. I could have chosen so many examples for this slide, but Meeple is just one. So Meeple being a simple third-party piece of technology that allows you to find your exact size at home. So when you order whatever you're ordering, and that can be through multiple different retailers who've teamed up with Meeple, then you know that you're going to eliminate the issue of returns, which has been a massive issue, of course, during the pandemic. So again, augmented reality being used in a really, really useful, functional way. I thought this example is interesting. I was talking about Porter, Net-a-Porter's magazine years ago, and the problem they always had was actually take up. It was amazing what they did. So this is, again, an augmented reality app that allows the user or the subscriber to Porter magazine to scan lots of different things within the magazine. And it allows all kinds of added functionality and experiences, which is great. So you can, as you'll see flicking up in the background, it can allow you to buy stuff immediately on your phone, see a product in different colors. There's a 24/7 concierge service, as you can see there. There's added video content, all kinds of cool stuff. This was kind of always there and people were kind of using it. But what's happened during the pandemic is Net-a-Porter has seen a massive increase in subscribers. And at the same time, those subscribers are massively increasing their use of the app because, of course, they can't go into stores. They're craving these experiences. And again, augmented reality has kind of taken off through this. But I just wanted to briefly mention, and David's going to go into so much more detail on this, but also I think augmented reality is definitely moving in quite a pronounced way into the outside world. And I think probably one of the most inspiring and impressive examples of this, as ever, is Nike. So Nike doing their sneaker drops outdoors, and what you're seeing in the background is just one of those. These have happened in the pandemic all over the States. In fact, sometimes Nike have got themselves into trouble, not that they've cared because it's generated good press, but where they've gathered such big crowds for these exclusive sneaker drops. So again, simple AR technology that congregates people to a certain geolocation. And as you can see there, it's causing this kind of mass hysteria and people buying products rapidly. I mean, to be fair, Nike did this years ago. I think they did augmented reality was used at a Kendrick Lamar gig, and he made his own shoe. And through augmented reality, this shoe came up while he was performing, sold out in a couple of minutes. But Nike's kind of really moved this into the outside world as well. But in terms of that side of AR, David's going to go into much, much more detail. But what I'm really getting at, I think, is that during the pandemic, augmented reality has really started to move into the mainstream. That's the big thing we're seeing. And that is having a massive effect because the take-up of users is rapidly increasing. And I just wanted to I put together this slide because it's just a really nice way of showing us just how much more quickly technology is gaining traction through users in this day and age. So that's really the change has been exponential over the last sort of 75 years or 100 years, and you can see this through this particular chart. Pokemon Go is probably the most famous example of augmented reality, but the speed with which that it kind of gained those users, it's partly because of the phenomenon of the idea, but also because of the ease of the technology, how simple it is, and how effective it is, how quickly it penetrates. And I think whatever you take from this webinar today and whatever you start thinking about in terms of augmented reality and how you might want to apply it, it's worth remembering that if you get it right, the potential to actually get people using it quickly has completely changed. This is a technology that's so easy to use, and now consumers are aware of it. And remember, I don't think they think of it as augmented reality. It's just a thing they can do to improve their experience. That take up for you and your customers, I think, could be incredibly fast if you get it right, and that's sort of worth remembering. As I'm going to put you back to Simon, but shortly David will go into much more detail about AR and what Darabase do. So that's me for now, and I'll hand you back to Simon.
Thanks, Jack. Really interesting. I have to say, I think the Nike campaign is awesome. But it illustrates, doesn't it, how great AR is for generating footfall, but there's also the kind of legal issues, I suppose, the legal head-on. You know, the crowd control can be an issue too.
Absolutely.
I think that's just an awesome campaign. Really interesting. Thanks ever so much for that. I think that probably brings us on to our next poll question of the day. Rebecca's got that one, which is, are you planning to use AR for brand communications in the next 12 months? A sliding scale from very unlikely to very likely. Please vote now. Do we have the results? Okay, so quite a lot of people not sure there. So you've got a job on your hands, David, to persuade them that this is really what you need to be doing.
I have indeed. I have indeed.
You have. So I'm going to hand over to you, David, from Darabase. David.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Jack, too, for a lovely lead into some of the things I'm going to talk about. I have indeed got my work cut out here. So although Nike is a good example of what people can do, I've got a few more that I might share with you now, if that's okay. Hopefully to convince you all that this is certainly a communication medium that people need to be taking seriously and leveraging both the risks and managing the risks and leveraging the opportunity. Just very quickly, I'm David Bogfrey. I'm co-founder of Darabase. I've spent quite a long time working in the immersive space now. Previous company was a Silicon Valley darling of the immersive space called Jaunt. And before that, I led digital and marketing transformation processes and projects across a number of much larger organizations, the one that I currently work in. As has been previously mentioned, I think when people talk about AR, they immediately go to Pokemon, and I'm quite sure a few of you did too. And then if you get a little bit further past that, you get to kind of social face filters, and the whole argument with those is that you know, you can do fun things and share it with your friends. But what we're also seeing is quite an old example here from IKEA of Place, whereby you can start to use it for really useful things as well as fun things. And the perfect projects in augmented reality are where those two things come together. So the IKEA Place allows you to see your furniture in situ in a realistic way and understand whether something such as a large item such as a sofa might be able to fit. The other thing which we've already touched on in the first poll is, and I use this stat quite a lot, as you can probably imagine, and maybe some of you got the right answer because you've seen some of my slides before, but there are indeed over 1 billion monthly active users of augmented reality. And the vast majority of that, in fairness, is coming from Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat. Snapchat have several hundred million users now, growing every day. And remarkably, they have huge penetration, something over 90% of the 13 to 25-year-old market in the US. And those people are using it 30 times a day. So this is often quite a hard to reach audience. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that and bust a few myths perhaps later on. As Jack's already mentioned, we are also moving from faces to places. We're moving from gimmicky to useful. We're moving from the kind of classic Taco Bell to being able to try on sunglasses. That's massively important, particularly as the stock might not be present or you are buying online during a pandemic. However, when we start moving outside, we've got a number of other technical challenges to overcome. The first is, how do we know where we are? GPS is actually only really useful down to, on a mobile device at any rate, down to about 10 meters. Maybe you can get a bit lucky if you're outside and shrink that radius a bit more, particularly if you're in a wide open space like a field or a wood or something of that sort, or indeed in a village. But as soon as you move into a highly developed urban environment such as a city, all of the glass and steel and underground electricity cables and stuff play havoc with your ability to both see the satellite and the compass, which is where you happen to be looking. And so we're moving into an era whereby we think about visual positioning systems, where you look through the camera lens of your mobile device and it looks up what it can see and compares that against a digital twin of the world. And I'll maybe come back to that in a minute. What that really means is that we're moving from a flat web, whereby everything is 2D and we see something on the screen of a mobile phone, to what we call a spatial web. One whereby you're looking through the lens of a camera at the three-dimensional world. And the information that you want to see is both contextual to that location and overlaid upon it. And as the Freeths guys will talk about later, that presents a number of challenges. The other big shift that we're starting to see, as well as this move from GPS to VPS, is the move from application development through app and downloaded through app stores to augmented reality being displayed through the mobile web browser. That means that we can reduce the friction dramatically for users to be able to see and interact with the type of content that we're really talking about here, which is three-dimensional content overlaid in the physical world. So whilst there is still a huge number of devices out there in mobile today that are capable of downloading things from the store, there are even more that are capable of using it via the web. It's also one click away, rather than having to go through the friction of downloading from the store and the payload attached with that and the data and the time lag. But also it's faster and it's less expensive to produce. And so that's today's world, but tomorrow's world is really about AR glasses. And AR glasses are not as far away as you might think. So I'm going to bust another couple of myths here. This is not something that will happen in 10 years' time, though it might take, approaching a decade for everybody to have the same number of devices as they do in terms of a mobile phone, so the 3 billion-ish mobile devices that are out there today. But this is a real thing today. Facebook did a deal with a company called Luxottica, who own the Ray-Ban brand and the Oakley brand, and they're bringing out a pair of mobile AR glasses this year. The heavily rumoured version from Apple, which undoubtedly will be a tipping point. The first version of their mixed reality glasses is highly purported to be coming out next year with a full AR glasses the following year. So if you think about that in terms of a timeline, that's probably something this year in 12 months, something from Apple in 18 to 24 months. We're really not that far away at all, and the process is accelerating. One quick stat for you that might be interesting is that now roughly a third of all engineers at Facebook are now working on augmented reality or mixed reality. And they're investing about $6 billion every year in bringing this reality to life. So this is significant investment. What we're also seeing is that they're investing in this, and brands are investing in this because AR works. So 70% better memory encoding if humans interact with something via augmented reality than if they just see a flat advertisement. You also get much longer engagement times, 4 times longer if you're playing with a virtual product in the real world, than if you're watching a video about it, which is much higher than web interaction. And the second big myth I guess I want to bust here is that this is not about the kids. Yes, Snapchat generation are absolutely using this a great deal, but really when it comes down to it, the billion users that we talked about to begin with are really, sweet spot is in the 25 to 34 age group, and certainly skews older than that in terms of 35 to 44. They tend to be quite wealthy, and interestingly, there's a very even split between the genders. And so please take away from this that this is A, major media channel, B, it's closer than you think, and 3, it's the audiences that you probably want to engage with. So if AR is the future, billions are being spent on it, today on mobile, tomorrow on smart glasses, we're going to start seeing all of this content overlaid in the physical world. And actually 9 out of every 10 major brands, when surveyed by the Boston Consulting Group, said that they were thinking about how they're going to use augmented reality in their media going forward, their media mix going forward. Hopefully that will start to change the mind of some of those on the poll. But there is another problem. The physical world is not currently at the table, and you guys as retailers, in particular, and property owners as a more general categorization of people, have a potential set of problems to address. And we've been doing a lot of work with Freeths to try and understand that. There's an awful lot of time and money and interest in the digital twin, but very little time is being spent thinking about the physical twin and the impact of outdoor media and augmented reality content placement. This is an advertisement from Snapchat for The Lion King that was placed on Buckingham Palace. If I was being really harsh, it could be thought about as the equivalent of digital fly posting. Again, you think back to Jack's example from Nike. That's certainly causing physical interaction with the real world, whereby the content is only virtual augmented in nature. And we need to start having a think about how we build a permission-based, brand-safe environment for this type of content when overlaid on the physical world. And we're starting to see how that's happening. There was a very famous case where Pokemon Go was sued by Milwaukee County over putting Pokemon stops in the park Indeed, there were pokies put in some fairly unusual places, one might think, for gameplay, such as the Auschwitz Museum. And the result of some of this activity was that, and through the court cases, that there are now ways that you can ask Niantic to take down some of that content or move it from a physical property. And that sort of self-regulation is really important. I also gave an example from Snapchat. Here you see the Lion King advertisement again. What this was effectively commercial content, leveraging the context of the place, the palace, and the king to advertise a film. And yet, as far as we're aware, there was little information surrounding what permission was granted and how, whether or not there was a payment indeed made between one or the other. And as a result, we start to now see warnings in their content creation tool for Snapchat, which says landmark templates are not offered for commercial use. This includes advertisements and other promotional purposes. You are responsible for obtaining any necessary rights and permissions before using landmark templates for commercial content. And so it's really important that we see not only this move towards regulation more formally, but this, if you like, self-regulation that's coming into play as we go forward. And there's a really interesting white paper that you'll all have available to you that was written by Freeths in combination with Darabase to look at some of how the current regulation and the current cases and some of the existing law now applies to this form of media. And I'll let the guys from Freeths talk more to that point over time. So, but what we're really seeing is that location exclusivity is defensible for augmented media in the same way that it is for physical media. And that's really important because that's the basis, if you like, of what Darabase is all about. Jack actually referenced the Nike things we've talked about before. It was actually a very similar campaign to that was the inspiration for the two of my co-founder and I starting Darabase at all. We felt that it was unusual and unreasonable for the property owner not to have any form of say in what was happening in their product and in their locations around their properties, even though the content was augmented in nature. So Darabase is very much about enabling a brand safe environment for AR, engaging advertisers in that process, engaging the platforms in that process, and engaging, importantly, the property owners, the physical twin, if you prefer, in that process as well. And so to do that, we have a property register, a registry in which property owners can assign their wishes and permissions for the type of content that they want to see there. They can serve their own content or accept third-party content. And we also have a risk management tool where we look across the major publishers, if you like, of content in the real world, of augmented reality content in the real world, and place that in a two-dimensional map so that you can aggregate the types of content and see it much more visually than trying to hold up the right app at the right time in your location in order to be able to visualize that. But as we know, it's driving significant footfall for both pokies and for brand campaigns. And so that's a unique tool, we believe, whereby you can start to look at the things that are going on around what you're doing. Your buildings and properties. And in a nutshell, Darabase really does two things. It helps augment existing outdoor media. So we bring billboards to life, and with a partner, for example, for Piccadilly Lights in central London. And we also then augment properties that don't have outdoor media on them. In this instance, a retail outlet whereby you can start offering promotions and offers and bring product to life in interesting new ways to engage the footfall that will inevitably be coming back onto the high street over time. Here are a few examples of where we augment existing outdoor media, digital screens, murals, traditional billboards, and even transport media in various ways. We bring to life then fully kind of immersive 3D experiences of space. We can augment posters and outdoor media in interesting new ways and drive footfall potentially from what is often a hard to measure set of media directly to a store, whereby you can wayfind someone from that point of interest directly into where your cash register is sitting physically. We can also do interesting things around audio sync, and we produce easy to manage and buy formatted templated ad units for you to do that really easily at scale. I've already mentioned that we augment places that don't have existing media. This is Battersea Power Station and the Royal Exchange, whereby we were able to provide live data feeds into a piece of augmented reality that sat in context of that particular building for a campaign that NTT Data wanted to run around their sponsorship of the Open. But in terms of retail, what we're really seeing is this big shift. And in 2025, Westfield's own research say that more than 50% of retail footprint will now be used for experiential activity more than just housing product. And that's a really interesting shift, and we're starting to see how augmented reality as an experience is being used inside of that context. So the top example here is a Lego example, whereby they took an entirely empty retail space and painted the inside of that with augmented content, so very little fit out, but you could still buy physical products and it was shipped to you through their e-commerce engine. The second one then is Zara, who brought to life the shop windows of their major stores by enabling people to see see models walking in the clothes that they were showing in that particular instance, and again link straight through to the types of e-commerce engine that have previously been talked about for execution, shipping, etc. So there are loads of ways I've already mentioned that you can move people from media to a retail footprint. We can bring to the life the front of stores in interesting new ways. Clearly that works when they're closed as well as when they're open. So you potentially extend the opportunity for engaging with customers in interesting new ways and keeping your tills open. It also means that you can see product in visualizations that are unavailable in a flat example per the shoes that shops that Jack was talking about. And indeed, you can then bring to life places that are going to be shops but are in the process of being fitted out, etc., etc. Touch-free try-on's been mentioned and various other things. And then lastly, just one more slide on Monitor. This is an example whereby we found some augmented reality content on a graffiti tool, a social media and user-generated content tool, whereby somebody had set fires at the House of Commons. Clearly, that's the type of content that you wouldn't want really to be up there, and we now help you both visualize that and indeed then take action if it's an area that maybe infringes your copyright or is passing off, or are various areas of law that content that's inapplicable or defamatory in some form can be taken down. And we investigate a lot more of those issues, as I say, in the white paper that Freeths have kindly partnered with us to compile. And that's me. Thanks very much indeed. I'll probably hand back to Simon at that point.
Thank you, David. Loads and loads of stuff in there, really, really interesting and thought-provoking. Loads of examples too. Thank you for that. I wonder whether you've persuaded our audience that there are things in there that they might want to. Okay, so I think that's an appropriate cue for the next poll question, which poses that question. If you got that one, Rebecca. Okay, so in the next 12 months, what's most likely to be important to you in terms of AR? This is a multiple choice question, so you can choose more than one if you would like to. So the first one is how I can create different revenue streams for use in advertising or brand communication, how others could use it to affect my business, property or product negatively. It's the defensive piece, to showcase or demo products or services, and no, not really applicable. Vote now. Do you have the results? Okay, so the leading one there, to showcase or demo products or services, closely followed by use in advertising and brand communication. Different revenue streams, quite a broad question.
Some progress, I hope, Simon. Some progress. We've made some progress, I hope.
I think we have, for sure. For sure, 15% in that category. So that looks good to me. I think that leads us quite nicely into the questions and answers session, Thank you to everybody who's been sending in questions during the talk. I think we've got a few in there. There's still an opportunity to submit questions, so please do keep submitting them via the question and answers function. I guess we'll go to the first question. David, it looks like it's one for you. What has changed in the last 12 months under COVID that means you think this is the time for retailers and advertisers to invest in AR?
I think there's a few things in there. Hopefully you've seen through my presentation that there are a number of technological advancements in terms of particularly the browser and how that can be leveraged. But I think probably the biggest thing that the pandemic has done for this industry and for retailers overall is teach people how to use QR codes. So beforehand, probably a year ago, what we were thinking was that QR codes were a thing of the past and that nobody was really very interested in them. They didn't get used a great deal. And actually what we've discovered is that the QR code is a camera first experience after all. It's AR in many respects. And so what people do now is they'll hold their phone up across the age groups for lots of different reasons these days in order to check into various places or whatever it might happen to be. And through training people to use QR codes, we've trained them to use the camera as an interface device. And what that means is that there is now very low friction between using the camera to scan a QR code, arriving at a web page, which is the next natural thing that can happen, and then launching all in one go an augmented reality experience. And so this lack of friction, this movement, if you like, from apps to the web and from teaching people to use QR codes just means that we're much closer to giving a very wide range of people in terms of an audience direct access to augmented reality experiences today. Sorry, Simon, I can't hear you.
Sorry, that's really interesting. Thanks, David. Did you have any thoughts on that, Jack, given your perspective?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with David. I suppose that, and David could talk more to this, of course, as well, but I would think that similar to other types of technology that have, whenever they've had that kind of, or whenever they've reached that tipping point moment, it seems to me like a key part of it is not just that consumers start to be using that technology more and it becomes more familiar, but also that seems to come at the exact same time, and it's no coincidence that technology gets more affordable and less expensive for retailers to apply. And I'm noticing that clearly is happening. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but that's clearly happening because it happens with everything. When stuff when use grows exponentially normally, it becomes increasingly easy to be able to apply it. And I think what's great is when it becomes a bit more affordable, it strikes me that gives you that opportunity to test it. You can go, well, actually, let's just try it in a couple of locations for a relatively low cost. And previous to that, it's this really, I remember in the early days of people talking about virtual reality and retail, and it was like a handful of retailers can do it. And every time it's a multi-million pound investment. It's this enormous undertaking, years of work. Whereas this clearly is something that you can just jump in and go, well, let's just try it. Everything there, the technology is built. It's using hardware that you already have in your pocket. That is the difference here. Anyone watching this, I would imagine, I don't want to drop David in it, but could probably speak to David and relatively quickly, easily, affordably try something out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, web versus app has really shifted the cost base for this. Certainly for our templated ad formats, we can be up and running in a matter of, a week or two for a handful of thousands. A lot of the context and cost these days of augmented reality is how big your aspiration is in terms of the creative you want to bring to bear. And I'm sure you've all seen, the TV adverts that are running or have run historically for EE around the Rita Ora, giant Rita Ora in the city, or indeed the Bastille thing concert in Birmingham New Street Station, or indeed just last night I saw Cadbury advertising what they're calling their egg drop, where you can hide eggs for people in places. And that would have been amazing in augmented reality, but it's about bringing people back into the physical world, and you can actually do this remarkably cheaply. And certainly where it comes to the web aspect, it's low friction, it's relatively low cost. The amount of money that you spend on this is entirely determined by how big your aspiration is from a creative perspective. So the read to raw end of the scale, much more expensive than placing templated formats in certain areas, and we can do that really quick.
That's great, thank you. I think that answers one of the questions that we've actually got in our Q&A, which was, do the cost implications of I put it out of reach of SMEs? To examples of large multinationals and city locations. So I think that answers that question that we've had in there. Thank you, guys. Next question then, looks like it's one for the Freeths team. Darren, you might want to take the lead on this one. The question is, do retailers and or property owners need to do anything about AR to protect themselves? And are we seeing this in the UK market?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. I'm Darren. I run the real estate team at Freeths, and we work with a lot of retailers. And for my part, I work with one of the leading supermarkets, large supermarkets in the UK. I'm always conscious of, you know, we have presentations like this, and Jack and David get to do all the flashy stuff and show all the advertising campaigns that look really good through the technology. And then when we get onto the lawyers, it's all about the problems. And what we can see from the poll is that people who are going to use AR over the next 12 months, or think they are more keen in brand promotion and revenue streams than they are in thinking about the problems. I think it was only 15%, Simon, thinking about the issues that can arise. And that's no real surprise, I guess, because those issues are really in their infancy, particularly in the UK. As David touched on, it's been a bit more tricky over in the US. We've had a couple of instances in Milwaukee, and in the UK, really, all we've seen is a bit of trespass here and there with apps like Pokemon Go. But for me, make no mistake about this, not wanting to push the problems, but they're important, right? So for me, make no mistake that AR can also be weaponized, in a sense, a very emotive phrase. But, you know, if you take a typical example of landlord wanting to promote in building, you know, as many revenue streams as possible and a potential of AR advertising, that may not particularly be what a tenant wants all over its shop front in the physical world. So that could create a problem. There's been a quite good example of that in the fast food franchise sector, where Burger King did a promotion on their app, where if you put it in front of a McDonald's, it would effectively burn the McDonald's to the ground and flame grill it and point you towards the nearest Burger King store, giving you potentially a discount. That obviously creates issues in terms of retailers and how that operates. The first step for me in terms of what retailers and property owners should be doing about this is awareness, really. It's taking part in seminars like this and thinking about the issues around AR. And then it's knowing what we're there and what's there and whether it is concerning for the businesses involved. David's talked a little bit about his product monitor, and I think that's a really good solution to knowing how AR is affecting any particular problem, and perhaps, you know, David will talk a little bit more about that later on. But from me, I'm always going to concentrate on the real estate world, and in the real estate sector, because there's no public regulation at the moment in the UK, it's quite tricky. The only thing potentially retailers can do is have provisions in their letting documentation to regulate between them and landlord what landlords do. And that is something that we are seeing more and more in the UK coming through. I know one or two retailers who have started to put those provisions in the documentation, thinking about this issue going forward. But for those people that are third parties and retailers don't have a contractual relationship with them, and they are using AR to affect properties, then it is a bit more tricky. And we get into the realm of what, if you like, private law rights can assist us and help us. And I think that kind of strays into your world, Simon, of IP and how we can challenge those sort of issues.
Yeah, I guess so, Darren. it's as you say, I think in the absence of regulation, it's trying to fit things into our existing law. I mean, in my world, unauthorized use of brand or content is an issue, which I think David has already alluded to, although that can be trickier in a comparative advertising context, like the Burger King example, because comparative advertising is generally permissible. And there are rules and things around that. So that's something to watch. I guess in terms of doing things to protect themselves, it's making sure that IP and brands and content are secured. So ensuring trademark protection is important, I think. Certainly we've looked at examples where adopting a slightly less traditional approach to brand protection could help in these cases, particularly where you're looking at iconic landmarks or buildings and things like that. I think practically owning the space is important. And I don't mean necessarily in a legal sense, but also in a legal sense. But in adopting AR for yourself, really establishing that licensing or permission-based model that David's been talking about, you can help yourself improve your position in terms of dealing with that defensive piece. You know, the problem of third parties trespassing and so on. Yeah, I think there's so much to talk about, really, and we've got not much time. I don't know whether Luke wants to comment on the. I mean, data protection is a huge area, and we've got a question in from somebody that's touching on that, particularly about use of this with younger age groups, ensuring that it's ethical, thinking in terms of facial recognition and that kind of things, and what the GDPR issues are. I don't know whether you want to speak to that, Luke, because I think that's a whole new bag of stuff to be concerned about.
Yeah, so I think that the question sort of revolves around how the advancement of this kind of technology will be able to advance hand in hand with ethical considerations. So I think I suppose it goes beyond just GDPR, although it is a kind of overlay on GDPR. And I think what I've been seeing from clients, but also from the industry, is I suppose it's a kind of a twin track thing. So you've got GDPR, which is brought in relatively recently and is intended to be a law which is fit for the digital age and quite technology agnostic and future proofed. And GDPR sets out a number of principles, and one of those key principles is that you should collect and process data, personal data, in a lawful, fair and transparent manner. So that sets a kind of a framework for, if you like, these kind of considerations. Layered on top of that, we're seeing supervisory authorities and data regulators bringing out guidance all the time on how to achieve that and how to comply with GDPR. And I think the UK Information Commission's Office, which is the UK data regulator, is presently consulting on the issue. Beyond just sort of legal compliance, there are reputational issues, of course, around this as well. And what I've seen from clients who are bringing out new technologies, not just in this sphere, but in others, are basically asking themselves, what is doing the right thing? We need to do the right thing. We need to be seen to be doing the right thing. And so bringing out their own kind of ethical codes as well, which are kind of loosely based on the GDPR framework to enable them to comply with the law, but also maybe go that one stage further because they need to look after the customers and so forth and users. And that's going to enhance their brand as well as dealing, averting legal risk. In terms of, say, using children's data, we've seen that there's the new age-appropriate design code has been brought out by the ICO later on this year, and that's a code which talks about or emphasizes the things that you can do to actually process children's data in a compliant and safe manner as well. So all these things are, coming into play and exist, I think, to address that issue, Simon.
Yeah, I think the harms bill is certainly of interest and something that I think we will be writing about going forward. We've got a question in on what steps should we take to make AR feel slick and useful rather than gimmicky. I guess this is one.
I've just answered that one actually, Simon. So yeah, apologies. I answered that one in the chat. So I mean, in short, for everyone, it's what's unique about AR. That's the question. Why are you using it? Are you using it to tick a box to say that you've done it? Or are you using it because it delivers a better, more practical, more useful, more fun experience that allows you to meet your objectives? And so understand your audience. It's classic marketing. Understand your audience, understand your message, and deliver it in a way that is compelling. And so if the most compelling way of doing that is video, use video. If the most compelling way of doing that is AR, use AR, because it's uniquely different as a mechanism and as a media through which you can communicate. And a lot of that is around its interaction, its 3D nature, and its context of place. Hopefully that's helpful. We did also have one from James Fairley that I thought would be interesting to talk to, if that's useful, Simon.
Sure, yeah, let's have a look. It's a very interesting presentation from you and others. In reality, you would not expect to see advertisement or advertisement over advertisement sitting on top of each other. Things they are poster glued on top of a different poster. AR does allow this. This could allow a property owner to sell both physical advertising space and the virtual space. Do you see a potential issue between property owners who take advantage of this, your business that specializes in just AR space, and traditional advertising agencies that use advertising space? And for the lawyers in the room, how might these different parties protect themselves against these sorts of conflicts? It's quite a big question. Darren, you wants to say something about that as well.
I mean, I guess it's touching on what I mentioned, and I think the question came in as I was talking, probably. but you know, for retailers and operators, for me, you know, nowadays, if you're multi-channel and you are taking physical space in your letting documentation, you should be thinking about this. There is no doubt about it, because of what David says in terms of what is frankly going to be an explosion of AR over the next 3 or 4 years due to the introduction of glasses by Apple. I think Sony's got a pair as well on the cards. So, you know, there is no doubt that this is going to become a much more popular medium. It won't be 1 billion, it'll be 100 times that in 3 years' time. So for me, operators need to be putting in their leases. Look, landlords, you know, okay, you know, we realize you might want another income stream, but how are you going to do that? And yeah, okay, they may allow it in some respects on the buildings, but they won't want it, you know, operators won't want it on the shop front. So maybe it can go on the side of the building, maybe it can go to the side of the shop front, but there's got to be some discussion as to either, you know, the operators blocking that for the landlords, or they're coming to a compromise as to what happens where on the property and on the estate. If it's a retail park, what can the landlords do in the car park, for example?
Yeah, I would build on that to the point about, you know, is one going to sit on top of another, is going to sit on top of another? And the answer to that is yes, but it won't matter, because it'll be targeted to the individual. And so, so what I see, what Simon sees, what Darren sees on the side of a building will all be different, but it'll be the same building. And yes, the monetization of that will either be the property owner or the leaseholder, in my view of the way that this works for the equivalency, if you like, of outdoor media. And so the second part in there was around how does this, you know, place people in conflict with existing out-of-home media? Well, my view is that this is kind of the ultimate future, if you like, of out-of-home media in many respects. And property owners, as they do today, should have a say in what happens in their locations. In the short term, that's why we help outdoor media companies augment their current real estate in order to provide incremental revenue based on their current business models. And so I think these are very compatible. What the work that we're doing with Freeths is all about, and actually the basic premise behind Darabase, is around ensuring that this is a medium through which that can be leveraged, whereby all parties have a stake at the table and are fairly represented. That's
a really good answer. Thank you, David. I think it illustrates as well just the different nature of this, that you know, you can be looking at different things. People aren't looking at the same thing all at once. You can't think of it in terms of physical space in the traditional sense. Certainly from my perspective, I think that means that you have to view advertising in that context as well, which raises completely different questions when it comes to ad clearance and that kind of thing. We are running out of time. I thought we might just finish by asking both David and Jack, and any of the other panelists indeed, what's the best AR campaign you've seen that you didn't do? Or if you have the opportunity to do it. Jack, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I don't, do you know what, I don't know if this is the it's not necessarily the best or the most exciting, but for me, it's probably the most illustrative of how powerful it's been over the last year or two. I don't know if anyone's used Qubits before for glasses, sunglasses. Qubits, a kind of, I guess, one of those brands, one of those kind of glasses, sunglasses brands that seemed smallish in London, kind of a Shoreditchy brand that was quite cool, but actually in reality are pretty big. They had the possibility to try on, to do virtual try on their website in 2018. No one even knew it was there really initially, and they didn't really promote it that well, and they were tentative because they wanted people coming into store because people bought more stuff when they're in the store, blah, blah, blah. During the pandemic, I read this thing the other day from the founder. The guy basically said they think now, just during the period of the pandemic, they've had several times more people try on glasses through their website than they ever had in their stores. And that to me, I just had a moment reading that where I thought that's incredible. And when you think about that's just one tiny industry, right? One sector, but AR has completely kind of switched, it turned the dial there. The whole thing has been turned upside down because, you know, people would always thought, I remember with Gentle Monster as a sunglasses brand as well, people would always say, well, it's all well and good that they have a big online profile, but you have to go to store for sunglasses and glasses, you have to. And then all of a sudden, that's been totally flipped by AR. It's just one tiny example, but I think it's really illustrative of that. And anyone who needs glasses, sunglasses, or otherwise should try it. Because the other interesting thing is, it's totally functional, solves this problem, but also there's so much stuff on social media that will just be people showing funny pictures of themselves trying on mad glasses on the website. So automatically, almost by accident, it has this really fun element. And it wasn't designed for that purpose. So it's like, it's super fun. It's really, really easy to use at the same time. That's one of the things I like about AR actually as well, is it has this ability almost kind of innately to be really useful, but really, really inspirational and fun potentially at the same time. And that's quite powerful, you know, that isn't necessarily possible from a lot of different types of technology. You can sort of do both at the same time. So yeah, Qubits, anyone should totally try it because it's so easy to use, but also it's really good fun if you just want to see how you look in some ridiculous pair of glasses.
So that's what everybody's going to do at lunchtime today. David, did you have an example?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've got loads of favourites. There's some really brilliant things that people like Cause as an artist have done, placing, you know, the famous character that they have in really, you know, iconic locations, including kind of Beijing and London and, you know, lots of other places. I really love that. I also know of some kind of art tours that are going to be happening whereby they're going to be placing art in the real world. They're bringing the sides of buildings to life. Murals are being brought to, you know, real scale on the side of skyscrapers. I love all that stuff. I think EE and all of the telco brands as a whole have got a real track record actually, because it's very akin to the 5G use cases that they're looking to promote. So I love the Bastille one that I mentioned earlier. I think the thing to note with some of those is that it's partly about the primary audience, how many people use it, and I'll maybe give an example of that in a minute, but it's also about the secondary audience. So the number of people that actually saw Bastille playing in Birmingham New Street in AR was relatively small. But the number of people who saw the video or the television commercial that was built off the back of it was vast. And so what we're seeing here is the kind of not only the primary audience, but the secondary audience being affected, and that has much bigger reach and much bigger effect, both on kind of innovation metrics, brand performance, etc. In terms of Nike, I love that one. Foot Locker and Adidas have done some similar things where they've got shoe drops and real things. But I think probably my favorite of all time, and maybe the first piece of outdoor advertising, was the Jaws example from Back to the Future 2. And I think that is the future to which we're walking. Hopefully the resolution of the graphics will be a bit better, but Darabase are working with property owners and Freeths in order to make that a permission-orientated environment so that we don't end up with Minority Report.
Excellent, that sounds really awesome. I think it's a really exciting subject. We are running out of time. If we haven't had a chance to answer your questions, we'll do that separately. Video will be made available and we'll send the white paper round to people. Thanks ever so much to everybody on the panel, to Dave, to Jack, to Darren, to Luke. And all that remains to be said is thank you for joining us, and see you soon.